Well, how about that Democrat convention, hey? And how about that speech by Kamala Harris? I mean, look, it was an absolute stem winder, and credit where credit is due. For a woman who used to gibber on about coconut trees and school buses, it was a pretty good show. The only thing is that for anyone with a memory longer than a goldfish, well, it was also pretty unbelievable. I mean, I know conventions are there to put on a show and for a party to prove to the wider electorate that their candidate is a safe pair of hands. But honestly, listening to Kamala Harris, well, it was all just a little bit much. I mean, let's think about this here. The side of politics that wants to meddle in everything in your life, from the flow of your shower head to the car in your driveway, well, I mean, they're talking about freedom now? Seriously. The side of politics that has made the school curriculum an endless litany about the horrors committed by the dead white men who founded America, well, now they're suddenly wrapping themselves in the flag? The side of politics that has put up Tim Walz, or Weird Waltz as I like to call him, who has been caught out embellishing his military record, well, and now they're all pro-defense? As I say, it's all a little bit much. And there was more, too. And I wonder what the fact-checkers are going to say about this. You know, I listened to Kamala Harris's speech, and she started talking about Project 2025, which you've heard a lot about, I'm sure, claiming that it was written by Donald Trump's closest advisors. Well, no, it's not true. It was written by a think tank with no ties to the Trump campaign. And again, the idea that Donald Trump is some sort of wild social conservative on abortion when he has declined to endorse a national abortion ban is nuts. Just as is the way you can tie Donald Trump to Project 2025, but Kamala Harris is allowed to skate on every lunatic far-left idea of the furthest left progressive wing of the Democrats. Well, you can see the difference. But to continue with Harris's speech, she made claims about January 6th. I mean, I forget how many race riots and Antifa mobs the Democrats have stoked, but put that aside, Trump, on January 6th, actually tweeted at his supporters at the Capitol, telling them to go home with love and in peace. Again, another lie. Kamala Harris claimed that cutting the federal Department of Education would take money away from schools, when in America, that's not the Department of Education's job. The feds don't give the money out. That's the role of local governments funded by local property taxes. Again, another lie. Now, it gets worse. Kamala Harris said that her experience as a prosecutor has taught her the importance of safety and security at the border, when in fact, as vice president, she presided over the biggest influx of illegal migrants in American history, migrants who, by the way, would be given amnesty and a pathway to citizenship under legislation endorsed by the Democrat platform. How's that border czar job going, Mrs. Harris? Oh, and back to the whole Trump dictator thing, she said. Well, anyone who saw that clip of Trump knew that he was making a joke. Not that, of course, you'd associate humor with the Democrats. Again, Kamala Harris's convention speech was an artful mosaic of lies, beautifully and sweetly delivered, but in the end, still lies. If voters fall for it, well, what do you say? When Kamala lies, democracy dies. All right, joining us now from the floor of the Democratic National Convention, where Kamala Harris has wrapped up her big speech, is Sky News Washington correspondent Annalise Nielsen. Okay, Annalise, thanks for coming on tonight. Been a big day. All day long, though, there were all these rumors we kept hearing. Beyonce, Taylor Swift. There was even a rumor going around that George W. Bush was going to show up as a special surprise guest. But the best they could do was Adam Kinzinger.
Adam Kinzinger, yeah.
And we got Adam Kinzinger. Where was the star power tonight, Annalise Nielsen?
Well, look, I think they wanted Kamala Harris to be the star power. I thought Beyonce would make an appearance just because they've made such a feature of her song Freedom on the campaign trail. I thought it was kind of ridiculous. They thought Taylor Swift would wade into this at the moment. And I know we have a bit of time, but if you let me start talking about Taylor Swift, we'll be here all night. But she's quite obviously going to endorse Kamala Harris at some point. That's where her politics lie. And I just couldn't see her weighing into it now because they've had security concerns about her concerts recently anyway. The last thing she's going to want to do is put a target on her back. And I don't know how Pink got in the mix. I've just seen Ben Stiller. I never really understand why and when celebrities wade into these things, but I don't think it was the worst thing in the world. They didn't get a bunch of big celebrity names. This is politics. Leave it. You know what they say, politics is celebrity for ugly people. Leave it to us.
well, indeed. Well, so look, let's get on to the actual big speech itself. Now, there were a couple of interesting things that Kamala Harris had to say about the economy and the middle class. Have a listen to this.
The middle class is where I come from. My mother kept a strict budget. We lived within our means. Yet, we wanted for little, and she expected us to make the most of the opportunities that were available to us. We will create what I call an opportunity economy where everyone has the chance to compete and a chance to succeed. I will bring together labor and workers and small business owners and entrepreneurs and American companies to create jobs.
Okay, now, Annalise, here's where I'm confused here, because suddenly Kamala Harris is talking all about small business, individual achievement, and an opportunity economy. Yet you don't have to go back very far, and she's talking about things like equity and equal outcomes and things like that. Have we seen another Harris flip-flop where she's now suddenly painting herself, as a red and tooth and claw capitalist and pro-opportunity, pro-markets, pro-business kind of person?
Well, look, I wondered the same thing. I mean, how much can change in 4 years? The fact that now we've had a convention speech so focused on her being a prosecutor. When I first got here during the George Floyd riots, when we were talking about having to have bail reform, about how there was complete overreach of police and law enforcement, and all of a sudden we've got this candidate for this side of politics saying that her big win is that she's been putting bad guys away for so long. And she's never worked in private sector. She's never had to make payroll. She's never worked in a business where she's had to balance the budget. This has been her bread and butter. And they've just done such a complete 180 on the absolute focus on this. And the crowd was going wild for it. And I don't know how well that translates out to ordinary Americans, especially the ones who normally vote Democrat.
To that point of the, what people see, they see this very big, heavy hand of state. They see more environmental regulations and more taxes and the inflation that is so crippling to the middle class that's come across under this administration. But another thing that really struck me too, just to jump off on your point, Annalise Nielsen, about her history as a prosecutor and talking tough on crime. She also talked really tough about the January 6th riot at the Capitol, and yet this is somebody who urged people to donate to a bail fund that was bailing out people who were involved with the Black Lives Matter riots. So it seems, again, pretty two-faced.
Look, this is just very much going to be her problem. These things will come back in this election campaign, and she can't avoid media forever. Even if she goes for the friendliest media interviews, she's going to have to sit down for an interview at some point. She's going to have to take a press conference. And some of those same stories that came up when she was running in 2020 will come back. The fact that she wanted to put parents in jail for kids who were missing school, that's a horribly punitive policy for low-income families who might have a single mother household struggling to make ends meet. Mum's working 3 jobs and kids are running away and not going to school because they're too busy working. And her solution at the time was, let's put them in jail to teach them a lesson. That stuff goes down like a lead balloon with the very kind of demographic they're supposed to be talking to. But what I think this does illustrate is the fact that they think their core demographics changed. And I think, in a sense, they're right. Roe v. Wade being overturned has really changed who they're talking to. And Republicans are stuck with this really toxic policy. And this is the problem. We've got libertarians listening to someone like Kamala Harris and thinking that she has more in common with them than the Republican candidate. How do you make that argument? And so this is going to come down to personality, I think, more than anything. And that's why this debate's going to be so critical.
Well, you know, and something you just said there, Annalise, really struck me. You said the crowd went wild for the stuff that she was saying about the opportunity economy. But it strikes me, certainly with that crowd, and I think if you look at the way the Democrats have just simply accepted whatever they were told, fall into line, you know, said, oh, Joe Biden's sharp as a tack. Oh, no, he can't be the nominee anymore. Oh, no, Kamala Harris is wonderful. You look at all of this together, and she could have just as easily gotten up, I suspect, and given a whole speech about equity and equal outcomes and much more sort of socialist themes that you've seen in her past, and they would have also gone wild.
Absolutely. I think everyone here felt like they were staring down the abyss, knowing that they were going to face another 4 years of Donald Trump because Joe Biden wasn't with it and they were stuck with him as a candidate, and they've been given a second chance and they're not going to take that for granted. And I think, too, we need to just kind of take into consideration how orchestrated this whole thing was. This whole process of open convention started after the 1968 convention in Chicago because of the rioting around conscription and how toxic it was, that it was all backroom deals deciding who was in charge in our country, in America. And so when we're being told that this time around they do a virtual roll call, there were no primaries because the incumbent was fine until he wasn't fine, and then they decide that Kamala Harris has to step up and there's no other option because all the fundraising is linked up. That's why it is important to call out just how orchestrated this whole thing was. And that's why we've also been focusing today on the fact that the small amount of dissent here was the people who were pro-Palestine and wanted an opportunity for some of the uncommitted delegates to speak weren't given that opportunity, and that's significant. These are supposed to be the conventions where they decide party policy, and this time they were as light as detail on possible because they don't want to hook her to any policy that they'll have to defend later. They just want a celebration, they want clips for social media, and they want content for the 200 content creators that have been sponsored to come here and post to TikTok.
Well, tell me about these content creators. You know, we were chatting about that before offline. Who are these people? And to the point of orchestration, is this a big effort to make this look like a totally viral, totally natural thing, but really it's kind of like the postmodern social media age wag the dog thing, where they're actually behind the scenes pulling the strings about what we're all seeing in our algorithms?
Well, I mean, social media has just completely changed the game. We're all on social media a lot more than we were for the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump election of 2016. And people do get their information from social media. And so what they want to do is kind of curate that zeitgeist, and what they want to do is make sure that all these Gen Zs vote. And the big change is now there's so much more early voting and mail-in voting. You're more likely to get Gen Zs actually voting, and so that's why they're spending all this time catering to them. So on the floor of the convention here, there was a special pit with some of the best views in the House for content creators so that they could go in and do their selfie videos and make content that's almost exclusively pro-Democrat. And they had the suites up here where we were. They get all the catering for free. They get the best seats in the House. They get special entrances and exits. And they want all the special treat. And they get access to all the best talent from the Democrats. They're not talking to traditional media. They're coming up here to do little dances on TikTok. So I don't know how this is going to track. We don't have any modern comparison. But it's happening, is all I can tell you.
I tell you what, it's pretty worrying, Annalise Nielsen, that, you know, we're moving from an adversarial press to paid advocates and influencers. Annalise Nielsen, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for staying up with us. All right, well, joining us now direct from Ireland is former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor, Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, thanks so much for joining us to talk about this amazing week in Chicago with the Democrat National Convention. Something that's really struck me watching the whole way they've positioned Kamala Harris over the past week is she's a sitting vice president with Air Force Two and all the advantages of office, and yet they're positioning her as the underdog. And in this sense, Donald Trump kind of looks more presidential at this point, but they seem to be trying to give Harris the advantages of being a challenger. What's your read on that?
That so far it's working. They are trying very hard to make it look like she is the new kid on the block. They're trying very hard to distance her from Joe Biden, and they're trying to take advantage of the fact, James, as you know, unfortunately, sadly, most Americans at any particular time don't know who the vice president is. So she's got this sort of wonderful middle ground where she can look like she's doing the job, but not taking any responsibility for doing the job. She has all the trappings of the job, the airplane, for example, the Secret Service detail, etc. But she doesn't have any responsibilities. And so far, she's been threading that needle quite well.
Yeah, and Mick, I want to talk a bit about the speech that she just gave in Chicago. I mean, it was really a very big change for somebody who's been watching Kamala Harris do word salads, and talk about coconut trees for years. This was a very polished, professional speech, but it also seemed to be like a repudiation of so many policy positions that we have associated with her and the Democrats and the hard left of the Democrat Party, which has been in ascendant recently, including on Israel. And just have a listen to this.
I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7.
Now, reading between the lines there, Mick, it seems like that would rule out any kind of arms embargo, and saying that Israel has a right to defend itself. That seems like that's going to upset some people on the left wing of the party. What do you reckon?
It is. She's trying very hard to distance herself from the Biden campaign, from the Biden administration. Keep in mind, about 70% of this country at any one time thinks the country right now is on the wrong track. So it's sort of hard for her to say, I'm going to continue to do what Joe Biden did. She had to sound different. So that was a lot more aggressive, I think, than you've heard her speak in the past. I think they've made the decision that the far left is now with them, that they will vote for Kamala Harris, regardless of what she says about Israel, and that she's now reaching out to the middle. Keep in mind, your word salad point is very well made. It's still accurate. Last night, as you would expect, was entirely teleprompted. It was entirely scripted. That's not at all unusual for a convention speech. She's actually quite good at those and has been in the past. When you've seen all these examples in the previous weeks and months and years of her just absolutely butchering the English language, that has been an extemporaneous speaking, something she still has not done. She's taken a couple questions now, but not very many. Of course, she's never done a presidential debate. It's unclear if they're going to do that. We might talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, you would expect a teleprompter speech to be a lot more polished than the extemporaneous stuff that she seems to be really bad at, and they seem to be insulating her from. Clearly, what does all this mean to put together? They are running a general election trying to reach out to the few undecided voters in the center, and they've sort of counted on the left now solidly supporting her in the election in November.
Yeah, and Mick, this is a big question, of course. You and I, and probably most people watching this here, are pretty engaged with politics. They know what's going on. But this idea that, she's been in the office of vice president, down the hall from the Oval Office for 3.5 years, and then saying she's going to fix on day one all the problems that have been created over the last 3.5, 4 years, there seems to be a fundamental contradiction, especially the way she's trying to avoid actually answering that by talking to the press. Can she get away with this?
She can, for the most part, because the media in this country is predominantly left-centric. So they will sort of give her this honeymoon period. They've given her a honeymoon period. They're sort of paying lip service to this idea of, wouldn't it be nice if she would take a couple of questions? But face it, the Washington Post, the New York Times, all of the major networks want Donald Trump to lose. So they're going to do everything they can to help Kamala Harris win. Now, your issue about day one is a really good one. You've heard Donald Trump talk about this before, that she's been in the office 3.5 years already. And she's talking about, on day one, I'm going to do this and that. And Trump has been trying to pound the message. Day one for her was 3.5 years ago. He's going to try to tie her to the Biden failures. It's probably his best card to play right now in the campaign. You'll be hearing more and more of that, because she is not the new kid on the block. She has been in that White House for 3.5 years.
Yeah, and Mick, I mean, just in terms of fora where he can play that card, you mentioned the debate earlier, and now it seems like there's a lot of confusion about even whether or not this is happening. Now, the left and the Democrats had accused Donald Trump of chickening out of the debate, but it kind of feels like they're the ones now who are running away from this.
Yeah, there's no reason for her to debate. I've said it before. I've said it for the last couple of weeks. Ever since this honeymoon since they anointed her, and again, they did anoint her. She wasn't elected for this position. The party leadership essentially said Biden is out and Kamala Harris is in. She has talked about doing debates, but I've always said that she's not going to do them. Why? Because she's winning. The message that they are delivering right now, not the message, the package that they are offering right now to voters, which is a bright, shiny, new sort of thing, and I guess an American kind of way. She's not new, but she is working, and she's surging in the polls. When that's happening, James, you and I both know you don't debate. Debates only hurt you. You can't win an election in a debate, but you can lose one, as Joe Biden proved a month and a half ago. So I see all of this sort of dancing around whether or not there's going to be a debate. My guess is there won't be any. And even if we do have some, it will be one, and it will be very, very short. The Democrats see nothing but downside to putting Kamala Harris on a dais next to Donald Trump. So I do not expect it to happen.
It's just incredible to me, Mick. I mean, they keep talking about our democracy and the threats to democracy, and yet they don't seem to want to participate in all the things that go along with democracy. Mick Mulvaney, we're going to have to leave it there. Enjoy Ireland. And Sean Spicer is going to be with us in a moment. But first, that all but open southern border remains a big problem for the Democrats, who've let in something like 10 million illegals over the last 3.5 years. What's funny is they don't believe in putting up walls to keep people out of the country, but when it comes to their own convention, it's a bit of a different story. Here's what happened when Steve Cortez tried to get an illegal Venezuelan named Edwin into the convention hall.
This is Edwin from Venezuela, migrant, invited in by the Democrat Party. He'd like to come into the Democrat convention.
You have to get your credentials. Yep, you have to go to Jackson.
Yep. Wait, you mean he needs credentials and permission to come in?
Yes.
To get past the wall?
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a border wall in a way, huh?
Yeah. You have to have ID, credentials. You can come
Okay,
in.
to come to the United States?
No, to come
Not to come to the
here.
United States, okay, but
No,
to come to
just
the Democrat
come through
convention.
here, baby.
Okay. You believe in security. You believe in securing a boundary. Edwin can't come in.
Without credentials.
That's all I know.
I commend you on guarding this border. You're doing it very effectively.
Well, I guess it makes sense. The Democrat convention is full of important people, donors, politicians. If you're a Democrat, would you protect the American border when America is just full of ordinary Americans?